Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. All throughout our academic careers, we are told how important having a firm foundation in math is, how we need to develop our analytic skills, and math is the pathway to do this. A major problem is that students either see no purpose in learning advanced math or are just not interested in the extra coursework. What's more is that access to math courses is problematic in some communities, whether because of lack of resources or shortage of qualified people to teach the courses. Recently, the nonprofit newsroom, the Hechinger Report, issued a national survey asking for people's thoughts about math education in America. Some issues raised range from math anxiety to lack of access to higher level math courses. Joining us today to discuss the issue of math education in America, today we welcome back to the classroom education journalist and editor-in-chief of the award-winning Hechinger Report, Liz Willen. Welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thanks so much for having me. And it's kind of great to have a chance to talk about math because it dogs a lot of people. And there's a lot of anxiety in this country around math. And yet it's so important.
No, you're absolutely right. There's always somebody that you come across that says, oh, I'm math phobic and math is not my best subject. We also talk so much about how important math is, but so many people just shy away from it. So it'll definitely be a great topic. And
that's exactly right. They shy away from it and they're scared of it.
And there's really nothing to be afraid of. They're just numbers, right? What are numbers are going to really do to you? And you can actually manipulate the numbers in your favor anyway.
Yeah, but it really all depends. I think some of the fear that people have developed over the years about math comes from that they may not have had a really good teacher who encouraged them early on and let them know that not only is math important, but it can be fun. So we're starting to look at how math is taught even in the earliest grades, because this perception that people aren't math people starts early. And unfortunately, it carries into the teaching career. So we're also looking at how teachers are trained and finding out that a lot of teachers who are tasked with teaching math are saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not a math person, or I'm not sure I'm good at it, so how am I going to teach it? Well, that really trickles down to the classroom. So what happens early and what happens at home and what happens when people start learning math and realize that it's something that you can build upon, that it can be fun and it's a challenge, that can color everything. So I think a lot of what we're doing in terms of our looking at math is figuring out who's getting the kind of instruction that keeps them excited enough and interested enough in the topic so that they're not proclaiming, hey, I'm not good at math, or I'm not a math person, or math makes me anxious.
You know, and that's such a very true statement, because when we think about at the elementary level, that K to 5 level, and mostly our students are taught in single rooms with a single teacher. Basically, the teacher has like what we call the common branch license, so which means they could teach basically every subject to a elementary school student. And by and large, most of those teachers have a very strong background and are very strong in literacy, but not so much in math. But they have to teach math as well. They teach literacy and math. And so they come into it with, well, literacy is my strong point, so I'm not going to focus as much on math as I should because I don't feel as strong in it. And it kind of just builds from there, snowballs from there. So if you get, as you mentioned, if you get a elementary math experience where that's been lacking, is just going to carry over when you get into middle school, where you do have more of a math-focused person. But the student now has such a poor foundation in math, they're already behind.
And that's really important, Kevin, because with too many students eventually get held back from the kind of advanced math that's a pipeline to jobs and to college level math and to STEM jobs and to engineering jobs and the economy overall. And so I think that if we start early, and we're going to be looking at that in our reporting at the Hechinger Report, how we're starting, we might get to a finish line. And one reason that we are reaching out in our work at the Hechinger Report, we've been surveying the field to ask, surveying our readers and teachers, et cetera. And we have a link to the survey on our site, the hechingerreport.org, because we want to hear from people about what are the bottlenecks, what are the obstacles, and what are some solutions to improving math education in the country. The responses have been fascinating and are helping us figure out where to put our resources as we report on this topic. We're also finding a lot of frustration, and we're trying to hear from readers because we're going to be visiting classrooms and campuses around the country. We're looking at what kind of math should be taught at what age, how to best boost lagging performance, how do you close racial achievement gaps, and of course, how to help students catch up after the pandemic, which has been a huge, huge topic. So these are all really important issues for us as we look at what's happening in math education in the country and see about ways that we can improve it.
I know one of the people that you were, or one of the teachers really that you were able to speak with in regards to an article that you all just produced, I think a couple of weeks ago, is a presidential awardee in mathematics teaching, Dixie Ross. And
Dixie is great. Yes, Dixie has been so helpful in this. She's taught every level of math offered in Texas public high schools. She's trained hundreds of AP calculus teachers in the summer. She has a lot of views. She answered a lot of questions on our survey, and I called her up and we spoke for about an hour and a half, and it was just fascinating because she's been in the classroom for so long and she loves teaching math and had so many ideas and views and thoughts about what we can do to make a difference.
Yeah, I think she said she's been in the classroom she has over about 4 decades of math teaching experience. So, I mean, that's a wealth of knowledge right there. So I was wondering if you could share with us, what were some of her thoughts that we could share over the air anyway? So what were some of her thoughts regarding the level of math education in this country, and maybe some ideas of what she feels we can do to fix it?
Well, she's been most upset about decisions about who gets tracked in or out of higher level courses. And she's been afraid that they're too often based on a student's race. So she feels like there's a lot of racism inherent in the way math is being taught. And she has worked so hard on that because there have been other surveys that we've looked at as well, and other data showing us that 2 out of 5 Black and Latino students who were surveyed, for example, for a recent joint report from the Education Trust and Equal Opportunity Schools, said they really want to study science, technology, engineering, and math, and they want to go to college. Yet only 3% of them were enrolled in AP STEM courses. And we've also found overall, looking at a number of surveys that I talked about with Dixie Ross, that our 15-year-olds rank behind 30 countries in one region on the TIMSS international test, and 4th graders trail 14 countries on another. So we kind of want to know, are other countries doing a better job than we are? So for Dix, though, for what she has been doing over the years is really trying to encourage her students to take math, no matter what race they are, and to tell them to stick with it and to really recruit them to careers where they'll do a really good job in math. One of the best things about talking to her was I decided to speak to one of her students as well, so I could learn a little bit more about her approach. And she connected me with Carla Edith Brayton, who's an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, or was when she first got here. She was living in Texas. She worked after school and nights at a McDonald's, and she'd been a good math student, but she was exhausted, and she was often falling asleep in Dix's class. And instead of Dix saying to her, look, you're not cutting it in this class, you've got to get out of this class, these classes are too advanced for you, she learned about her and realized that she was trying to help her family support herself. She told her never to give up. She helped her with extra work and helped her stay. She pushed her to apply for scholarships. And now she has a job that's related to math. And she's a civil engineer, a mother of two, first in her family to attend college, and a homeowner. And it really made me realize the power, not only of a good teacher, but one who recognized that here was a student who might have been held back based on her race and her immigration status, and let her know, you know what, you can do this and it could change your life.
You know, you raise a good point there that, and when you were telling that story, I was thinking, you know, that's not just being a good math teacher, that's just being a good teacher. Because when you see that a student is falling asleep in class, that's not normal behavior. And so you, instead of just saying, well, I have 30 other students in the class, so I'm going to worry about them and I don't have time to worry about this one, you take the time to find out what is going on here and find out a little bit about the family and about the person's life. And then you give them what they need in order to survive, to succeed.
That's right. And you're not going to see all teachers acknowledge that they have the time for that. Their class sizes are very large. And also, let's not forget, there's enormous pressure to catch students up post-pandemic, and students are really behind in math. So what Dix Ross was able to do many years ago for Carla is not going to be easily replicable in today's landscape, especially at a time when a lot of teachers are leaving the profession and they're exhausted. And as Dix herself pointed out, a lot of people who are trained to become math teachers easily either become burned out after a few years or find more lucrative jobs in the private sector that pay a lot more, help them pay back student loans, don't have as many demanding hours. And, you know, so that we're losing good math teachers, and it's also hard to attract them into the profession. It's a perennial problem, and I think it's the one that we're going to have to work harder to solve if we're going to improve math education in the country.
You know, that issue you just brought up, that's an age-old problem, right? Because we see that has been happening all the time, that people who are very well proficient in math and science, instead of going into teaching, they go into private industry where they can make sometimes 4 or 5 times as much money because of what they do. So if you have a choice, if you have an opportunity to earn $50,000 a year being a math teacher or earning $150,000 a year in private industry, which one are you going to take being right out of college? So most people are going to go the money route.
That's right. And so she said one of the things that she's working on is having other teachers encourage students who are pretty good at math and who seem to like it to encourage them to become teachers. It's an uphill battle, but she thinks that it's one of the really important routes to take. I've had a lot in our survey, too. We also heard a lot about the way teachers are trained to do math. And there's feeling that we need to do a lot more, not only just in terms of training them, but to get them to feel excited about teaching math and to understand why things like conceptual understanding is so important, and also to retain enthusiasm for being in the classroom. Those are all issues that we heard a lot about, and concern that classroom teachers in the U.S. face chaotic environments, and they really need help with not only strategies, but lesson studies. They need mentors. They need master teachers to work with. They have to also understand that all students the students in their classroom are entering math at much different levels, often quite a variety of levels, particularly post-pandemic, and also need help.
I think that's a whole other issue that we really need to spend a lot of time focusing on. How do we catch students up post-pandemic? Because not only do you have the students who have fallen behind 2, 3, sometimes more years than that in that year and a half that we were in the pandemic, but you also have those students who have the interrupted schooling, who may be going to a different country and they're leaving the state and so forth. And then you have all the different states that have their own curriculum and so forth. And so there's no continuity even within the United States because we have such a transient society. People are moving from state to state to state on a regular basis. So the level of education they receive is going to vary from state to state, city to city, school district to school district. So there's a lot that we have to unpack here in order to really understand how do we catch these students up.
I mean, the Common Core was in some ways supposed to address that disparate way of teaching math that changes everywhere, that made it different everywhere. And so there's still a lot of questions in our survey. A lot of people ask, well, what impact has the Common Core had both on the standardized test scores and on, trying to get students to learn the same thing everywhere at the same time to some extent. And they are wondering now that it's, no longer in our lexicon to constantly talk about Common Core math, which led to a lot of frustration for parents and for students, whether we should be looking at what other countries are doing, countries like Japan and Finland and places that demonstrate better outcomes. So there's a lot of questions around that. And I also think that, we've been talking a lot about in our reporting about high impact tutoring and what kind of a difference that will make. The NAEP scores were really disastrous this year, and there's a lot of concern about what can actually be done.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is education journalist and editor-in-chief of the award-winning Hechinger Report, Liz Willen. I'm glad you mentioned about the NAEP report, because that's what has always been called the nation's report card, right? Where they take the scores of the fourth grade students and the eighth grade students, and they compare them to similar students from around the world to see what our standing is going to be. And I think, and you kind of touched on that earlier as far as what the Tim's reporting was and so forth. And I'm sure NAEP wasn't too far off as well. So let me ask you if you can answer this question based on those, or share with us what those results actually were, what the latest NAEP scores and studies were, and if we can benefit from anything from looking at those other school districts as far as those countries, as far as Japan and Finland, what they're doing. Is that something that we should be doing, looking at those other districts, or is it something that we can even replicate here in this country?
Well, let's take it one at a time and unpack this nation's report card. There was a long time after the pandemic when everyone was whispering, wait till those test scores come out. How bad are they going to be? And we got those answers finally in September last year. And that question of how bad was it? The answer was even worse than we anticipated, especially for many 9-year-old students. Right away after that, there were a lot of things that were expected and some that were unexpected. It was the first ever drop in math scores, 7 points for 9-year-old students, and the steepest drop in reading scores since the 80s. Basically, the way it was billed was, what does this mean? 2 years of COVID-related shutdowns and interruptions erased 20 years of educational progress. And that was overall. But we also saw that while the declines were spread among all income levels and races, it was Black and Hispanic students who suffered the most drops in reading and math scores. And also we saw students in every region except the West fall in reading. So we also found a bunch of surprises, but those immediate reactions to those kinds of scores were that inequitable and unjust and differently funded school systems made a huge difference, and the students who were the most underserved were those who were continuing to struggle academically. Those were some of the things that were some of the immediate takeaways. There were a couple of surprises as well. And we also, we looked at some of the places where students did well, just kind of to understand a little bit more about the inequality and the disparity. So the scores fell so much that the eighth graders now score below, though, in Massachusetts, which is often the highest achieving state in the nation. They fell so much during the pandemic that their eighth graders were now scoring below those in New Jersey, and in math, 11 points lower. And that tied Massachusetts with Utah. That was a real surprise. We also found that large cities, though, surprisingly, were generally more resilient than the rest of their states. And a couple of other surprises as well, but they're still leading to big questions and a lot of gloom and doom. The thing about math that I think was so discouraging was that these declines were the largest ever recorded since the U.S. Department of Education began tracking academic achievement in 1990. So that's a big problem, and we're seeing a lot of effort and energy about trying to, figure out what to do about this, and it's going to take a few years before anyone is even clear on it. Your other question about...
I'll get to that in 1 second, because I want to just piggyback on this really quickly. Is I think one of the things that has really become evident out of this pandemic is that remote learning is not necessarily good for teaching math, especially at the early levels, because math is one of those areas that if you don't get it right away, you need to have somebody physically kind of holding your hand and walking you through the steps in order to do it. If you're left to your own devices, and a lot of students who, especially those elementary school and middle school students who don't have the requisite skills to get to rely on their own devices properly, they're not going to build that foundation that's necessary. So you really need that hand holding.
Absolutely. And I think that's one reason why I've been still combing through the survey results and we're still getting them. A bunch of teachers and parents both said that post-pandemic, they felt it was going to be so much more important to highlight basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division in math teaching, and focus on establishing strong foundations in these areas before we get into the more conceptual lessons. So I think that there's a feeling if you didn't master those basics and you spent a lot of time trying to catch up on those basics, or you weren't in school. And remember, during the pandemic, not everybody had internet connectivity, and some people were sitting in parking lots doing homework on cell phones, and there were a lot of disengagement, people who didn't show up. So if you miss the basics, you're going to have a really hard time later on with algebra and calculus. And these are the courses that have become so important in college admissions, and determining who gets, not only into certain schools and on the right track, but later on whether they get into, work in data science and engineering and places where their jobs are. So these are a lot of concerns about how math is being taught and how much emphasis needs to be placed now on basics.
Now, of course, the NAEP also shows the other countries around the world as well, and how they scored. And of course, the countries that are consistently at the top are Japan, Finland, Singapore.
Singapore, yeah. And there's a lot of schools that are using Singapore math. We've seen that in our reporting over the years, and it's very, very popular. Not all schools are able to offer it, but those that do, many of them have reported both success and student engagement. Not everybody likes it. You also have to remember, because people can do things differently in different districts, depending on funding and parents, et cetera, and teachers. I rarely found a math curriculum that isn't controversial in one way or another. We talk about the reading wars. Well, there's also enormous discussion and disagreement about what kind of math should be taught and how, and when algebra should be offered, and whether or not students have to take calculus. I'm just reeling in all of the responses, and there's a lot of questions and concern about all of those things. And if you don't take algebra at a certain time, are you getting off track? But if you started too early, does that mean you'll be weakened in the basics? There is such disagreement on this topic that it's really fascinating. And it's also because we don't do everything the same way in every district. So we try to look for solutions and success stories, but for every solution and success story, there'll be a naysayer or someone who doesn't want math taught in a certain way and wants a different kind of math taught in that school, in a school district, or for their children.
Exactly, because we have a lot of people who want math to be taught the way that they learned it. And because if they want, especially if they want to be able to help their student, their children, they want to say, well, I didn't learn it this way, so I'm going to teach you the way I learned it. And then then the child goes back to school, and the teacher looks at their paper and said, no, it's wrong because you didn't do it the way I taught it to you. Well, my mother sat up with me and we did it this way. We still got the right answer. So what's the problem? And that's the part of the confusion as well.
Oh, it's totally a part of a confusion. The most popular story ever on our site for many years was entitled, why is this Common Core problem so hard? And it was parents trying to help their kids. And I do remember when my kids were in elementary school and they were learning a kind of math that required them to cut things in little pieces of paper all over the house. I think when I clean up, I'm still retrieving them, and they've both graduated from college at this point. Little pieces of paper everywhere. So no matter what kind of math you introduce, there's issues around it. But that age-old question of parents thinking that they want to help their kids with it and they can't is a big frustration. It's an understanding, though, that, the way we teach things change, but that doesn't mean they don't want to be able to understand and help them with what their kids are actually doing.
So what are, again, some of the other solutions? Because I think another person you spoke to as part of the article was Giovanni Coleman, a newer teacher, younger teacher.
She was mostly interested in starting earlier and training training teachers early on in early ed so that they know more about what they're doing. She thought that was a very, very important thing to do. Just looking back on some of the notes, though, back to the Singapore math that we were talking about, there was a lot of enthusiasm for this particular model. I mentioned that there's often disagreement about how math is taught, but a couple of parents mentioned that this Singapore-based model is something that they really like, and that it's very, very helpful. And they also spoke about how parents need to get over the idea you and I were just talking about, that just because they learn things a different way when they were in school doesn't mean that is now the best way to do it. They also said, though, it's hugely important for school districts and teachers and those in charge to help articulate to parents, hey, you know what? We are teaching math differently, and it's better. And even if you don't understand it, you should support these new ways of teaching it because there's evidence that they're better or different than the way you were taught.
If you had to leave our audience with just one final thought about what can be done to improve math education in America, what would that thought be?
Well, I'm going to instead turn it around and say, please answer our survey. We want to hear from you. As a journalist, I don't have the answers so much as I'm invested in asking the questions. So I'm hoping your readers will look on our site and fill out the survey and tell us, where can we go? What classroom should we be in? What teachers should we seek out? We're still getting a lot of these responses, but we can't do it without the people who are children are learning it now, who are math teachers, who have strong feelings about what works and what doesn't. At the Hechinger Report, we really care deeply about the solutions as well as the problems. We all know this is a big problem. Our students are behind. The pandemic hurt us deeply. How we're going to get them to catch up, what's going to be effective, what works, and what's the best way to do it. We are so open to answering all those questions and so looking forward to finding some of those answers. And the only way we do that is by reporting. We talk to people. We're in classrooms. We analyze the data. We look at test scores. We see what's improved and what doesn't. But we're sort of crowdsourcing this one because we really need help about where's the best place to go, who are the teachers we should speak with, what works. And I'm really grateful to all those who have filled out the survey and helped us tell this story. It really is important.
Thank you again for coming on to our show today. And again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.